If you're wondering why I keep asking you to make connections, it's because when you summarize, it's really, really important that you are able to pick your head up, look across everything you've read so far, and make connections between these ideas, because ultimately you have to put them together or synthesize them. So here, we started with talking about the decisions that led to and avoided nuclear war. Then we worked in this idea of a modern view or a new history. A modern view of the crisis reveals it was broader in its origins, scope, and causes than most people realize. And we need to put those two together. It's not always the easiest of tasks to reword something like this. So let's do it together. So I thought I'd walk you through this next step because it's kind of complicated. We're trying to synthesize decisions that led to and avoided nuclear war, a modern view of the crisis and how it's broader in its origin, scopes, and causes. And then we also have this new piece that we collected saying it was a global event, an integral part of the wider Cold War and a consequence of the nuclear arms race that began with the bombing of Hiroshima. Phew, okay, so let's incorporate all three of these together into one summary statement. I know the author wants us to analyze the decisions, so I think I'm going to use the word analysis. An analysis of the decisions that led to and then avoided nuclear war are key to understanding the Cuban Missile Crisis. Got it, okay. And then I'm going to incorporate the second part. A modern view of this crisis reveals that it was broader in origin, scope, and consequences than originally believed. And the last part, it was a global event, part of the Cold War, and a consequence of the nuclear arms race that began with Hiroshima. So we take one more look, make sure we have all of our main key ideas incorporated. An analysis of the decisions that led to and then avoided nuclear war are key to understanding the Cuban Missile Crisis. A modern view of this crisis reveals that it was broader in origins, scope, and consequences than originally believed. It was a global event, part of the Cold War, and a consequence of the nuclear arms race that began with Hiroshima. So the next step for me is always to take that thesis and apply it to an image or an outline. And here we're talking about the decisions, and you begin to see the shape taking form for you. The overarching idea of it being broader, and broader in what? Its origins, scope, and causes, also called consequences. And then the second part of that is when you read on, and it says it was a global event, part of the Cold War, and a consequence of the nuclear arms race. When you understand what the author's trying to do with the thesis, you begin plugging these ideas in. So for example, the first part of the thesis says it was broader in its origins. Well, I know origin is how something starts. Well, the text says right there, a consequence of the nuclear arms race that began with Hiroshima. So I'm going to add the idea Hiroshima underneath origins because origins means the beginning. The next part where it says scope. Scope is kind of like what all it entails, what all it includes. Well, now it's saying the crisis was a global event. So I'm going to add global event underneath that section that says scope. And then the last part, consequence of the nuclear arms race. And we have this interchangeable consequence and causes. So for me then, one of the causes of the Cuban Missile Crisis was the nuclear arms race. So all of these ideas can be now plugged into your outline or your visual form of this essay.